In two daring raids, U.S. Special Forces intercepted two different tankers at sea.
So the Times exclusive, hundreds of Russian Shadow Fleet vessels could now be seized by the UK.
The moment U.S. forces intercepted the tanker Aquila II, something shifted at sea. Not politically, operationally. This wasn't another sanctions announcement. It was a vessel physically stopped, cargo seized, movement halted. And once tankers start getting stopped instead of merely sanctioned, escalation stops being theoretical. Because oil at sea is not a spreadsheet problem. It's steel, crew, and jurisdiction. Germany had already seized a Russian-linked shipment. Finland detained suspect vessels. Estonia boarded ships under national authority. France moved forward with legal action tied to the tanker Barakai. This wasn't symbolic enforcement. It was contact. The difference matters. Financial sanctions apply pressure at a distance. Boarding a ship collapses that distance, and Britain is preparing to do it next in one of the most sensitive waterways on Earth. If the UK intercepts a sanctioned tanker in the English Channel, it will be the closest NATO and Russia have come to direct maritime confrontation since the war began. That's the scale of what's developing, because the fleet being targeted was never supposed to exist in the first place. For 2 years, sanctions were expected to compress Russian oil revenue to the point where exports would shrink under their own weight. Price caps were introduced to limit profit. Insurance restrictions were designed to choke off coverage. Financial penalties aimed to isolate Moscow from mainstream shipping markets. The physical flow never collapsed. Instead, a parallel system took shape. Aging tankers circulated under unfamiliar flags. Ownership ran through shell structures. AIS signals flickered. Offshore transfers blurred accountability. What began as a workaround hardened into infrastructure. British and maritime analysts now estimate that the broader shadow fleet ecosystem includes roughly 1,400 vessels worldwide. Not all are sanctioned. That isn't the point. The point is that together, they sustained Russian exports above 5 million barrels per day. In late 2025, volumes approached 6 million. Revenue dipped under price caps. Physical throughput endured. That endurance changed how London interpreted the problem. This was no longer a compliance loophole. It was a functioning maritime network operating alongside the sanctioned one, and it carried risk. Many operate as aging hulls under opaque insurance and management structures. When ships like that transit narrow choke points near critical undersea infrastructure, the issue moves beyond economics. It becomes strategic. Undersea cables carry financial transactions and military communications. Pipelines anchor energy systems. Those assets sit beneath waters now frequented by vessels operating in legal gray space. Recent cable incidents in Northern Europe sharpened attention. Each case could be explained individually. Together, they reinforced a larger concern. Ambiguity at sea is no longer tolerable at scale. That is the backdrop to Aquila II, because once a tanker is physically stopped, a line has been crossed. Not legally, but operationally. The West moved from tracking to touching, and that shift creates a ladder. It begins with interception. Compliance keeps it procedural. Refusal raises pressure. Close shadowing reduces maneuver space. One miscalculation can push escalation across domains. No one is predicting that outcome. But that is how it escalates if it does. Britain understands this, which is why the conversation in London has changed. The Shadow Fleet is no longer being described as a sanctions evasion problem. It is being framed as a national security issue tied directly to funding Russia's war effort and to maritime stability in Euro-Atlantic waters. That framing unlocks different authorities and different planning, because once enforcement shifts from banks to boarding ladders, the sea becomes the domain of consequence. And Britain is not preparing quietly. It is preparing deliberately. What changed in London wasn't tone, it was interpretation. For most of the war, enforcement lived inside financial systems. Sanctions lists expanded, insurance markets tightened, banks flagged suspicious transactions. The assumption was that pressure applied through compliance architecture would eventually constrict the physical movement of oil. That ceiling has been reached. Exports continued, brokers adapted, tankers rotated flags faster than regulators could respond. Ownership chains dissolved the moment scrutiny appeared. What had once been described as evasion began to resemble a parallel maritime economy operating beside the sanctioned one. Britain revisited its own legal foundation. The Sanctions and Anti-Money Laundering Act 2018 provides authority over specific vessels tied to sanctions breaches. For years, those powers were used cautiously. That restraint is eroding. Ministers now describe the Shadow Fleet as directly linked to sustaining Russia's war effort and as a threat to Euro-Atlantic infrastructure. Once a problem is framed as security rather than compliance, the response shifts domains. By late 2025, London announced what it called its largest sanctions package against the fleet. Hundreds of oil tankers and LNG carriers were added to restriction lists. Individual hulls were designated under bespoke authorities focused on ships rather than abstract networks. Designation alone does not stop a vessel underway, which is why operational preparation began. The Joint Expeditionary Force activated the Nordic Warden System, connecting maritime surveillance across 22 areas of interest from the Channel to the Baltic. This is not a blockade. It is persistent monitoring designed to compress reaction time. Reaction time is the real variable. The fleet relies on ambiguity, shifting registries, manipulated tracking, and legal delay. When surveillance is continuous and integrated, delay becomes harder to manufacture. Reporting in early 2026 described the Royal Navy preparing a dedicated command hub focused on tracking sanctioned or high-risk tankers moving through waters where Britain has jurisdiction. Analysts monitor movement in real time. Legal teams assess authority windows. Operational planners evaluate boarding feasibility. Political leadership remains connected to the timeline. This is preparation for contact, and geography matters. The English Channel is not open ocean. It is compressed, crowded, and under intense surveillance. Commercial shipping, naval assets, energy flows, and civilian traffic converge in a narrow artery between the Atlantic and Northern Europe. Russian-linked tankers pass through it. Inside territorial waters, jurisdiction clarifies. Britain does not need to speculate about authority there. It can act. If a sanctioned tanker is intercepted in the channel, the encounter unfolds in full view of satellite feeds, global media, and multiple governments. A boarding here would not be absorbed quietly. That is precisely why it carries leverage. The channel forces decision. In distant waters, enforcement can be staged at a remove. In the channel, proximity defines the encounter. Naval vessels operate near commercial shipping lanes. A boarding team approaching a supertanker does so in tight maneuver space. Every instruction is documented. Every hesitation is visible. This is where escalation risk concentrates, because if a captain complies, the incident remains contained. If a captain refuses inside UK territorial waters, the ladder climbs. Interception becomes standoff. Standoff draws escorts. Escorts increase proximity. Proximity reduces margin for error. No state involved is seeking confrontation, yet this is how it develops if resistance appears. Britain is aware of that structure. That is why the shift has been deliberate rather than theatrical. The government has built its case through environmental framing, sanctions law, and alliance coordination rather than spectacle. Germany has already seized a sanctioned cargo. The United States physically intercepted Aquila II. Finland detained suspect vessels under its authority. Estonia conducted boardings. France moved forward with legal proceedings around Boracay. This is no longer theoretical enforcement. It is cumulative normalization. Each action reduces the shock of the next one. Each boarding narrows ambiguity. Each seizure builds precedent. Britain does not need to act first. It only needs to act within a pattern that is already formed. And that pattern points directly toward the channel. Until now, enforcement has looked controlled. A tanker is listed, another is monitored, one is seized. That control lasts only as long as compliance holds. The moment a sanctioned vessel refuses an order inside territorial waters, the script changes. A tanker enters the channel, it is identified, it is instructed to alter course. If the captain complies, the incident ends in port. If the captain refuses, proximity replaces paperwork. Naval vessels close distance. Communications intensify. Political leadership becomes directly involved. At sea, proximity is pressure. A warship shadowing a commercial supertanker in one of the world's most congested waterways is not symbolic. Every maneuver carries environmental and strategic risk. Russia does not need to deploy a warship to escalate. It can respond indirectly through inspections elsewhere, maritime friction in other regions, or pressure applied to Western infrastructure in ambiguous ways. This is the gray zone. Physical enforcement creates an escalation structure whether anyone intends to climb it or not. Interception, refusal, standoff, political reaction, reciprocal friction, that is the latter. The seizure of Aquila II tested coordination. Germany's cargo action set precedent. Nordic detentions normalized regional enforcement. If Britain acts next in the Channel, the encounter will be narrower, louder, and more visible than any of those previous cases, and visibility amplifies tension. For Moscow, the Shadow Fleet is not symbolic. It sustains exports above 5 million barrels per day despite price caps. Physical disruption threatens logistics, insurance rates, and revenue timing. Sanctions pressure can be contested quietly. Steel at sea cannot. London frames this as protection. Cables, energy grids, maritime safety. But if a boarding goes wrong in the Channel, it will not be interpreted as regulatory enforcement. It will be interpreted geopolitically, not war, not direct NATO combat, but something that did not exist before: normalized maritime confrontation. And once that threshold lowers, future encounters become easier. The English Channel is not just another shipping lane. It is one of the narrowest, busiest, most monitored maritime corridors on Earth. Energy tankers, container ships, naval patrols, fishing fleets, passenger ferries, all of it compressed into a corridor that connects the Atlantic to Northern Europe's industrial core. And Russia's Shadow Fleet has to pass through it. That is the strategic choke point. In open ocean, ambiguity protects movement. Jurisdiction is layered, enforcement becomes diplomatically complex. But inside territorial waters, authority sharpens. Britain does not need consensus to act within its own maritime boundary. That makes the Channel different. Dozens of Shadow Fleet vessels have transited these waters. Some ignore voluntary reporting regimes. Some adjust course only when challenged. These vessels operate in legal gray space. Each transit is a test of will. If Britain begins stopping sanctioned vessels here, the encounter happens in full view of the world. Satellite feeds, commercial tracking apps, real-time maritime observers. There's no quiet version of a Channel interception. The risk is not symbolic. A supertanker diverted in congested waters changes traffic patterns instantly. A boarding team approaching a vessel in tight lanes introduces collision variables. Even compliant enforcement carries environmental stakes. One miscalculation in these waters would ripple through global headlines in minutes. And then there is the diplomatic layer. Many of these tankers sail under third country flags. Crews are multinational. Ownership structures stretch through permissive registries far from Moscow. A seizure framed as sanctions enforcement can quickly involve states that do not see themselves as participants in this confrontation. That multiplies pressure. From Moscow's perspective, Britain acting in the Channel could be framed as maritime harassment. Russian messaging would not focus on legal nuance. It would focus on narrative. NATO powers physically obstructing energy shipments. From London's perspective, failing to act weakens credibility. That is the tension. The Channel offers leverage because it is unavoidable. It also amplifies consequence because it is visible and politically sensitive. Germany's cargo seizure occurred outside this pressure cooker. The US interception of Aquila II happened in wider waters. Nordic detentions took place in more controlled environments. The Channel is different. Here, proximity is unavoidable. Here, miscalculation compresses time. Here, naval presence carries historical memory. Britain understands that better than anyone. Control of these waters has shaped European security calculations for centuries. Any visible enforcement action carries echoes beyond the immediate event, and yet the Shadow Fleet thrives on ambiguity. It thrives in places where responsibility blurs. The Channel strips that blur away. Jurisdiction becomes concrete. Intent becomes legible. Evasion becomes harder, which is precisely why it is the most dangerous arena in this entire enforcement campaign. Because if Britain chooses to act here, the sea stops being abstract. It becomes immediate. And immediate environments create fast decisions. Fast decisions create friction. Friction creates escalation potential. That is the geometry of this moment. Until now, enforcement has felt procedural. A tanker is sanctioned, another is tracked, one is seized. Oil volumes dip but never collapse. It looks controlled. That control depends on compliance. The moment a boarding is contested, the illusion breaks. A sanctioned tanker enters UK territorial waters. The command hub flags it. A patrol vessel intercepts. A boarding order is issued. The captain refuses, not violently, simply refuses. Now the encounter shifts from regulatory to operational. Royal Navy personnel approach a vessel carrying tens of millions in crude. Communications are recorded, Moscow reacts in real time, satellite feeds track every movement. No shots fired, but proximity increases. The tanker continues transit. A British vessel blocks its path. Maneuvering space narrows, commercial traffic diverts. Headlines spread across Europe. At that moment, enforcement becomes confrontation. Russia does not need to send a warship. Escalation can occur elsewhere. Western shipping could face increased inspections. Energy infrastructure could experience ambiguous disruption. Maritime pressure can rise without crossing into open conflict. Escalation does not require gunfire. It requires friction, and friction at sea moves quickly. Germany has already seized cargo. The United States intercepted Aquila II. Finland detained vessels. Estonia boarded ships. France is pursuing litigation. Western governments are no longer just tracking, they are touching. That increases deterrence credibility. It also raises confrontation probability. The Shadow Fleet adapted to price caps, insurance limits, and sanctions architecture. What it was never built to withstand is coordinated physical enforcement in narrow, politically sensitive waters. Britain is preparing for that test. If Britain intercepts a sanctioned tanker in the English Channel, it will mark the closest NATO and Russia have come to direct maritime confrontation since the war began.